America, talk to me, Lauren Collin, and let us go beyond what you believe to better understand why you believe anything. I am not here to debate. There are plenty of places for speaking right past one another. Nor am I here to judge. Here on the We Unite, We Win podcast, user-generated America series, I will speak to anyone willing to give me an hour of their time to share their clearly stated morals, ethics, religious beliefs, or lack of, and views on humanity that inform their personal approach to culture, politics, and government. The aim of the UGA series is not to change anyone's mind. I am doing this in the hopes that you, the listener, will join me in putting aside your assumptions and listen to the guest for an hour. If the conversation gets you to ask a question about yourself and about your own beliefs and why you believe anything, all the better. I am excited to always be bringing you more of this content. Please consider supporting this work and becoming a paying member at $8 per month by visiting weunitewewin.com. Today's guest is Lorine Ghabranious. Lorine, a friend of our previous guest, Cynthia Clemons, has long worked to make our country and our world a better place for all. She most recently worked for USAID and lost her job as a result of Elon Musk's DOGE cuts. Lorine connects with a higher being as her foundation to find joy, contentment, and fulfillment. Listen as Lorine shares with me where her beliefs come from and how her journey shapes who she is today. Let's chat with Lorine Ghabranious. I am with Lorine Ghabranious on the We Unite, We Win podcast, user-generated America series. And Lorine comes to us as a guest in one of my most favorite ways, as a friend and contact of a previous guest, Cynthia Clemons. So we thank Cynthia for connecting us to Lorine, and we thank Lorine for being here today. Welcome, Lorine.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
Give us the bio of Lorine, where you're from, where you've lived, family, work. Maybe it's just the one thing that if we hear us that's Lorine. So please.
It's a good question. Let's see. How do I describe myself? I'm originally from the DC area, grew up in Maryland, just moving back for 5 years in LA. So have been bi-coastal. I, primarily grew up in the DC area, but I was born in London. I'm half Egyptian, and I think that has probably colored a lot of my upbringing and perspectives on life.
Born in London to an English parent and an Egyptian parent, or an American parent and an Egyptian parent?
American parent and Egyptian parent. So I was actually born the last year in England that would allow you to have dual citizenship without being of British descent.
Wow. So for a brief period in time, you actually had full access to Europe, and then Britain's stolen that from you?
I was really up at the top, and then I have really come crashing down quite quickly here. But
well, at least you can go to England anytime you want.
Yes.
We'll start off with that first question, or our favorite first question here, which is, do you, Lorine, think about on the daily, sometime during the year, maybe never, pursuing and maximizing your own happiness?
Yes. And I would hesitate because I think my definition of happiness has changed over time. I've kind of come to accept that happiness isn't what I really perceived it to be when I was younger, where you're actually happy all the time. I think more content is what I aim for, and finding moments of happiness throughout the day and really savoring those is something that I'm kind of aiming for or looking for in life. But yeah, I think finding happiness is important, at least satisfaction. Yeah.
What was the definition you would have given your younger self, and what is that new definition that you walk around and feel today?
I think the younger self probably felt happiness meant actually being joyful or happiness or happy at all moments of the day time. And now just knowing that can ebb and flow, and there might be periods of going through rough things, but you can still find joy in those hard times. So a bit more balanced, I think, as I've gotten older.
The happiness is a philosophical ideal. We live it as human beings. And as human beings, we have these moral frameworks, our own personal philosophies, our own ethics, and they're built in different ways. For some people, they come from a truly philosophical standpoint. Maybe it's like utilitarianism. For others, it's religion. For some, it's a combination. For some people, it's just inside. Like, this is just me. Where does your sort of moral structure and framework come from?
I think it's probably been a combination of things. I grew up Catholic, but moved away from Catholicism fairly early in life, I'd say in my early 20s. But I think those values kind of kept with me as I went older. But really, I think my current perspective around it or thinking has been really shaped by my favorite book called The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer, which really essentially, if come down to it, it's a lot about unattachment and kind of finding, surrendering to the whims of life and finding joys and moments of kind of content or, where you can find fulfillment throughout everyday occurrences. So kind of bringing it back down, knowing that you only have a short amount of time on this earth and what are you going to do with it? Try to be, a good person and live that every day. So that really shaped my viewpoint of how I approached life. I read that in my mid-30s. And I think from then to now, that really, anytime I get into a period where I'm feeling down or kind of lost, I reread that book and provides a lot of insight for me.
Your Catholicism, was it a version that we commonly hear of you in the pews, you hearing from the priest, reading the weekly passages, not really reading the Bible, but the version of Jesus died for you, all of your sins, and everything's in the next life? Was that sort of how it was wrapped up for you?
Went to Catholic school from kindergarten to 12th grade, a lot of Catholic guilt. Yeah, just, I think it was probably more the liberal version of Catholicism rather than a very strict version, which I'm thankful for. But I just noticed that there were a lot of what I found to be some like hypocritic kind of ways of thinking that I didn't align with and questioned from an early age. And the more that I had my own, ability to really question and think outside of my own beliefs, I came to the conclusion that I'm not really into organized religion in general. I'm pretty agnostic. I do, still I've come back to believe in a higher being and spiritual. I'm fairly spiritual, but don't necessarily feel that the organized religion provides me much value. Anyways, I understand that it provides.
Did you ever feel connected to that Christian Catholic God, or when you as you started to question, were your questions like it never felt right, or it was like that was just new information? Like, what was that even in your younger years, that connection?
I think there was a connection. It felt more personal between me and God rather than I didn't really understand why I needed this organized structure or like other individuals to be part of that. That felt always kind of off. So I really didn't understand why I needed to like go to confession and tell a priest my sins. I was like, can't I just have a direct relationship with God? So I think I always questioned that, but, until I was thinking on my own and like analytically challenging my own views and beliefs, I would say that was probably like an unconscious belief in religion and kind of doing what I was mirrored or shown in my childhood from my Catholic upbringing.
Is that God or the higher being that you connect with today the same one that as that youth and now with the clarity of your beliefs, or is it a different connection?
I would say it's probably a bit more, a lot more grace. Like I think in my mind as a younger child, this God was all loving, right? And accepted everyone and everything. And I didn't really quite understand the whole dichotomy of like, you could do wrong and go to hell and be a sinner. And I was like, but wait, if he loves you and everything that you're doing, shouldn't there just be a place in heaven? Like, what is this other like hell? I don't understand it. So I think that version is kind of where I've landed, is that it is just this all loving being and accepting of anyone and everyone. Obviously, like, try to live positive, good values, be kind to other people. But yeah, I think now I have a little bit more combination of spiritual plus psychology, knowing that we all have backgrounds and the human experience that comes along with our behaviors.
Was it the Singer book that caused the switch, or had you already been leaving the Catholicism before and you were on the journey, and that's what then on that journey came into being?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. I was very anti-Catholic in my 20s. I moved away from religion, actually became, I didn't believe in God at all. Got a master's in ethics, didn't believe in God. And then the Singer book actually got me back to believing in a higher like being, or a higher kind of spiritual God, or I still don't like to call it God, to be honest. I also like universe or
is the Singer
power,
is it a Buddhist tradition? It's just a universalist tradition?
It's a combination of for me, like Hindu, Buddhist, that nature.
A master's in ethics. What landed you there?
It's a good question. Let's see. I wanted to get my master's in human rights. I was considering getting it in law. So I had got to law, or I took my LSATs, did great, get a good score on that one. Then knew I wanted to kind of go back to England at a certain point. Was considering getting my LLM in the Netherlands, but then found this program that was a combination of kind of international politics and ethics. And it was just like fascinating. It was asking all the questions across all the different topics that I was interested in. And I was like, you know what, this is probably a frivolous, stupid thing to study, but I'm super interested in it. So why not? And it was 2006 before the 2008 crash. So I was young and idealistic and didn't really think that I needed something tangible to get a job. But I don't regret it. It was great. And we kind of sat around in the pub, just like asking philosophical questions, and got to chat to classmates and learn from each other. And it was an amazing 2 years.
And it was what I presume a traditional, starting with the Greeks, the pre-Socratics, and like working your way all through. I imagine, were you in England, or were you in Scotland?
I was in England. Yeah,
so they take all the credit. They take all the credit for like Hume and Smith, even though they're Scottish.
That's right.
You said, actually, right, you became an atheist, anti-God. Hume famously never declared his actual atheism, but it's there for us to all presume. What was that balance then of seeing someone like him and ultimately making what did he offer or not offer that someone like Singer did that brought you back to the idea of the higher being?
Well, it was interesting. So in my master's course, one of my professors had mentioned, he had said something like, you know, whether there's a God or not, it's not going to change my behaviors. Like it doesn't matter if there is. And, you know, that kind of just made me think like, oh yeah, it's true. Like, I don't really need to have this God entity in my life to be a good person. Like, even though ethics is often tied to morals and, you know, religion, he was a atheist who was a professor in ethics. So that, I think, made me firmly become an atheist. And then as I was going through just like hard times in life in my 30s, read this book, and it just, I don't know, it kind of came, I feel like books or messages come to you at times in your life when you need them. And when I read his book, it just felt so comforting to know that he has a line in there basically saying like, we're just individuals or souls in a human experience sitting on a rock, floating through space. It just made it so like we are so minuscule in the whole scheme of everything that's going on. And it just lifted such a weight off my shoulders that I was like, okay, yeah, like at the end of the day, none of the like minute bullshit matters. I don't know if I can say that, but like it just doesn't matter. Like what really matters, like what is like, if you're going to die tomorrow, right? Like what are the things that are really going to rise up to the top that are concerned about? And that's family, like making sure that you are finding things that bring you joy each day, whether that's like, it's just the small things in life. So I think that really just like drove home my core beliefs in everything. And again, when I'm just going through hard times, when I reread that book, it again just like cuts the knife through everything else that's going on and brings that perspective back to me.
I too enjoy the fact that we are somehow stuck to this rock hurtling through space at 20,000 miles per hour.
In the very small like portion of the entire universe, there's so much.
Yeah. Is there a virtue or set of virtues that you commonly come back to? Wisdom, justice, courage, faith, hope, something in that, in there, that one or two or more that really kind of are your guideposts?
I'd say justice is a big one that comes up pretty often, especially currently. And I think courage is one that I notice for myself comes and goes. When I'm more in alignment with myself, I think it's easier to be brave and courageous. And then when I'm not, I notice that it's much harder because I'm just not living my authentic self or values. And so that's another way that I kind of gauge where I am in life, like how easy or hard is it for me to be brave or courageous, meaning how often am I practicing it, right? Because practice it more often, that becomes a bit easier to do in your day-to-day.
On the justice front, you mentioned human rights, that you thought you might want to be a lawyer. Is it something that you actually have ended up doing professionally, like that justice became?
I was working up until a few weeks ago at USAID, so the U.S. Agency for International Development, and there was definitely many elements or kind of common themes of human rights and public health, making sure that just people, the global population, had basic needs taken care of, and it was something that I really enjoyed. So in that way, yes, I practiced the justice through that lens. Was it through law? No. Although I'm more and more thinking about going back and doing that again. But we'll see. We'll see if it comes to fruition or not.
There's definitely a great argument to make that, right, the USAID mission is one of justice and humanity. And sorry for the loss of your job and the way in which it has come about. And it is deeply un-American. It is robbing us all of our liberty and freedom. And it's horrible. And sorry that it has hit you directly personally. What does that symbolize to you, that change or what happened to you? How does it reflect on this present moment in this country to you?
It's a really good question. One that I've kind of been struggling with, like answering or, kind of asking myself. I think there's been elements that what this country has been around for how many years. It's just becoming a lot more explicit to many people that hadn't seen, the underbelly of what this country really is, like the behaviors and beliefs. But I think current day, it's pretty scary to me that these things that I feel are going against Congress and the Constitution and a lot of like the legal structures that have been put in place, they're really being tested. And to me, that's terrifying because I feel like we are losing a huge sense of our democracy, right? Like it's becoming eroded with each day and being tested, and our definition of normal is becoming more and more just like to the right, which, is really scary to me. And I'm, often lately questioning, like, do I even feel like I belong anymore? Like, is this a place that I want to stay? And, where I struggle there is that, like, I want to fight and defend for my country, but I'm also like, I'm tired and exhausted, and, it's sad. And so, like, are there things that I can do from other places to defend the US? And when is that point is another question. So I think there's a lot of emotions that's swirling, a lot of personal feelings, but trying to like sort through those. But I do know that regardless, like I want to fight for a democracy in the US. I think that is something of value and what I see the US as, and hoping that we can actually get to a more equitable and, like the positive things that you hear about the America, right? Like those ideals that are, to me, American. I hope we can really return or have come in full force again.
When you left your Catholicism, did it have any ruptures in your family?
It did at the time, yeah. I think it really upset my mom. I remember at the time, like, as I wasn't wanting to go to church, especially like on holidays and stuff, I kind of threw a bit of a fit. And my mom was like, come on, and siblings and family, my dad was like, come on, just go. It will make her happy, please. So I remember kind of just like pushing back against that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, no, it didn't really have any lasting like pulls, more than just like little, rebellion here and there.
Are there, you said it was, you said you had a more liberal version of Catholicism. Are there others in your circle that had, we'll call it a more conservative version that are aligned with Trump and MAGA? And do you still communicate with them?
It's really interesting because there are a lot of people that went to my high school. I felt it was a very liberal, like it makes you wonder about like interpretation, right? And obviously like your own exposure of your own environment. But there's many people that I went to high school with that are very aligned to Trump, and like those beliefs of Catholicism that align in those spaces. Do I talk to folks? No, I have to be honest, I don't. And it is actually something that I'm struggling with now. I have a friend that did vote for Trump. And it feels very personal to me. It's something that I'm really working through because I don't want to cut off. I find it really important to have conversations with people, right? And if we go back to the Singer version of like, we're all just having a human experience floating on this rock. I hate that these political figures are tearing us apart. But on the other side, I also feel this very strong moral sense of like putting a line in the sand, right? Like one of the things that I, whether it's right or wrong, keep thinking about is, like Nazi Germany. Like what was that line? When was the time when people were saying, okay, no, like we're not going to do that? I feel like it is very much the frog in the water, right? And so currently, like there's been so many lines that have been crossed for me. And so it's hard to have those relationships, but I just know that like as a person, I do want to have open and honest conversation. It just might not be in the circles that are super like friendships that are so close to me that where it's so personal right now, right? Like I need a little bit of time and space to really put some distance between that. But I feel very strongly to take away, like we're all human, and at the core of our humanity, we all kind of want the same thing. And to like bring it back to that, which is why I really appreciate this podcast, right? Like hearing stories of upbringing and kind of where people are coming from, because I do think that your moral beliefs are formed and created by your upbringing and, your environments and like who you surround yourself with. And so getting back to those stories and the core essence of people, I think is really important, and kind of just taking away from these labels and political parties and views, kind of just like get in the way sometimes. But I will say that I am definitely right now being clouded by that. And I'm just acknowledging and giving myself grace to be in that space.
And you brought me back to actually the question that I stumbled over, which is great. It was a purpose, which is right in Nazi Germany. The people who supported Hitler were just called Germans. And now we look back and we call them all Nazis. MAGA certainly has, they proudly wear their red hats and they're still Americans. So to your point of some people apparently are raised away and don't change. And we look at the way they're raised and we go like, wow, it's an interesting way to choose to engage with the rest of humanity. And some people are raised also that way, but then change, right? Some people, I guess, could even be liberal and end up very, not wanting to be connected to other human beings. What do you think is the journey that's going to have to happen here in America to enough of us to swing to a solid enough majority to get to more of the universal rights that we say we believe in? We've never done it. We've never done universal rights. And it's obviously because there was always people pushing against universal rights. But even as we've championed and that slow arc of justice gets closer and closer to universal rights, the arc, it starts to bend down. So at what point does the axiomatic, right? What time do we point? What's going to have to happen to Americans, do you think, to get enough of us to want to be there?
I've given this a lot of thought too. And, obviously I don't know that I have the answer, but I do think that the U.S. is a very individualistic society for the most part, right? Like I think we pride ourselves on being a group of individuals that can bring yourselves up by the bootstrap or like all those things. Like you are given this ability to kind of make yourself whatever you want to be as an American, whereas other societies are very village or community based, right? Like you are part of a community that you collectively are looking like the weakest among you is part of your collective. And so you're looking out for everyone. I think we're going to have to shift in some ways there. And I think we are over time. I think people are going to have to feel it, though. Sadly, that's kind of the conclusion that I've come to. Right now, there's a big portion of the population that keeps getting protected or, doesn't feel what those on the marginalized communities, those are kind of on the immigrant communities, like they're kind of always feeling it first. And so like these tariffs are probably a good example of it. And the things that have happened just in quick succession over the last 90 days, I think in a way, it's kind of great that it's happening so fast. It's scary that it's happening so fast, but I think people are going to start to feel it quite quickly. And maybe that will start to shift and like change opinions. But yeah, I think unfortunately, I feel like many people that were voting for the collective good were trying to save or protect people from feeling that pain. But really, until those like individuals feel that like the repercussions of their own behaviors and actions of these policies and these actions, nothing's going to change. And so that makes me sad for America because I think it's going to be a hard few years, decades potentially to come back. But I think that kind of needs to happen is kind of where I've landed over the last, few months, that pain needs to be felt.
There's an argument often made that while not voting in their own self-interest, perhaps economically, perhaps their overall health, their overall wealth, their overall connection to people, that it is actually, in fact, voting to harm the other, even if it hurts you a little bit, but hurts the other person more. Do you think that's a factor in how some Americans exist and vote and act?
I think ultimately, yes, if you're looking on the surface, that's really what it comes down to. But, kind of, again, what we were talking about with your upbringing, kind of like the amount of knowledge and exposure that you're given. I think America kind of thrives on keeping people, for lack of better terms, dumb, right? Like you're not given information. It's very easy. It's such a big country. I drove cross country from LA to Maryland, and I was just like driving through parts of the country, and I was like, wow, there's so much of this country. It's huge. And there's so many different communities. There's so many people in this place that have different perspective, different viewpoints, different, like, coming, just like each pocket of the country has its own like ecosystem, right? Its own like culture and like way of doing things. And so it's unique to any other part of the world in that way. And I think that shapes how information flows and how it influences different pockets of this like big country. And so again, I think it just hasn't affected the whole country in the same way. And for the first time, I think it's actually going to start to infiltrate these towns, or especially if they're not going to have bailouts or like things that are going to come in and rescue. I also don't think that people know how government works. And I'm not surprised by that. I honestly I was a history major. I grew up outside the DC area. I didn't understand how government worked until I actually participated in government. And then I was like, oh, well, it's much more complicated than you think it is. Of course, somebody in middle America is not going to understand how this works, right? Like, if me growing up in the DC area doesn't understand how it works and everything around me was government, then how are you expecting other people to know how that works? And I don't think that outside of high school, there's any like program or like continuous education that allows you to like remember how the civic system works or participate it, other than like voting every few years, right? And so I think that's really important. Again, why I think these conversations are critical, because it kind of just like strips away all of these labels and the ways of doing things. And you can share knowledge, you can share information, and we can learn from each other. I do think also like capitalism, right? Like I think I'm very much against capitalism, and I hope that we kind of shift away from it. I think there's values of capitalism, of course, but ultimately, like, the more I've kind of been reading up on like mutual aid, like supporting each other, supporting communities is the way that like we all kind of elevate together. And, you know, sometimes that can happen when you have nothing. Like, when you have nothing, you have everything. And so I do wonder if there are going to be, like, if it's going to be hard times, if that is going to be that transformational shift that we need as a country to bring us together. And I hope so. I hope it's not just all negative, right?
History would say yes, but it's not guaranteed, right? It was the 1890s and the first set of robber barons that led to the first progressive era in the early 1900s. And then it was free market capitalism eating itself in the late 20s and early 30s that brought Social Security and ultimately the Great Society. And then each time the ultra wealthy fight back and claw back, and then they give us once again their laissez-faire economics. They package it up in new ways. They get you to hate the right people, and eventually enough people apparently touch the stove, to your point. They burn it and go, maybe we should do something different.
Like, you know, at least now, in a sense, there's like, we are so much more connected with like globalization, the internet. Like, the news travels so much faster than it did back in those times. I think like as we circle through the history, like repeating itself, we get new pieces of information and new ways of like communicating and like being with each other in community, that it'll be fascinating to see how this iteration of history kind of comes to be.
You mentioned American individualism. And when I think of Adam Smith's self-interest, because this is what we're talking about, right, is people like not doing the things in their self-interest until all of their other priorities become not as much as I have to feed myself, I have to whatever, take care, make sure. He talks about self-interest as including beneficence, which in the short definition, right, is that in order for me to actually always be following my self-interest, I have to make sure you, Lorine, can only always follow your self-interest. Is that a way through that sort of can tie America to the idea, to what is truly an American idea of individualism and serve community? Or is there, do you think there has to be a bigger break?
I mean, I think that's part of it, right? Like looking out for another and in a way to help yourself succeed. Also like a change manager. And so I often look at it from those lenses, but like the sphere of control, right? Like there's only so much outside yourself that you can control. You can't dictate other people to do things. But I think that's where that education, that like people learn in different ways. And so if people need to like learn by doing or learn by experiencing things, this is, why I'm a big believer in like AmeriCorps or Peace Corps or any of those. And you can do it in other ways. Like those are just like the formal programs, right? Like you can do it within your community, just like volunteerism, like giving back within your church. But I think doing things for other people outside yourself just brings a sense of just like fulfillment, joy, like happiness that you often forget about when you're only focusing on yourself. Like it really just brings something else when you have the reaction from another person, like add somebody else other than yourself. And it just like amplifies that joy. And so in a way, like, I do think that that is the path, but maybe not in the terms of like, you have to look after somebody else, or I don't know, like what the messaging would be around that. Right. But like in simplest terms, yeah, like I think that's why there's such value in church communities or like volunteerism and all of those things, is because it does bring together a group of people to like do something that is greater than themselves, like have a collection of just like voices, know that somebody's caring for you, also just like gives you a bit of a breath. You can take a breath to know that you're not doing it on your own, which is so exhausting and so like scary to think about. And I actually think that's probably what keeps people in this individual, capitalistic mindset, is because it's like, okay, I got to take care of me and my own. And like, it's a scary space. And like other people are taking those resources away from us. So let's try to hoard it, rather than being like, if we're all taking care of each other collectively, that's just a mindset we're coming in. Nobody's going to be left by themselves, right? Like we are going to make sure that everybody is taken care of as a collective community. And that will get us going forward, or like moving forward, which is why I really appreciate like mutual aid as a concept.
The everybody includes you too.
Yes, exactly. It
Right.
includes you too. And so you can take a deep breath when you're unemployed, right? Like, that it will be okay. You're going to be able to get fed at the core of it, or like your worst fears, like your worst fears can come true and you're still going to be okay.
You mentioned capitalism. There's not one definition of capitalism. There's not one definition of socialism. And then everyone seems to argue what somewhere either like actual Marxism as the sole form of socialism, or at least the quick version of it. And then we talk capitalism is this either laissez-faire or free market, unregulated capitalism. And back to, I told you early on, I really like the Scots. Back to Smith again. Right? He would not describe himself as a capitalist. He wasn't even describing capitalism. He was describing this competitive market economy that's coming out of this feudal and mercantilist systems that are sort of dying. When you say capitalism, or when you say, when your critique of our capitalism, is it simply to have a regulated capitalism that makes sure markets are competitive, or is that mutual aid government enforced and somewhere more along the lines of a Marxist socialism? Like where does competition end and government begin for you?
It's a good question. And I think I go back and forth on it. Where I have seen currently that I'm not in huge favor of is like shareholders, right? Like corporations beholding to shareholders, a small group of individuals that are dictating how they're operating their companies, right? Like there's the collection of like oligarchs and monopolies that are kind of taking place in the US currently. And it doesn't allow for competition, right? It doesn't allow for innovation. So it's almost opposite of that. So I do, in a sense, like I appreciate the competition and the innovation. Like I'm an Aquarius. I like innovation. I like being creative and like creating new things. But I also think that there is a space for making sure that people have basic human rights, like the healthcare, being able to get fed. There's more than enough food. Like the US is such a rich country. We are the richest nation in the world. We should be able to take care of all the people within the US. We could take care of the whole world, right? Like we have enough money that people should be able to have their needs met. And so that to me is a very basic, like human rights, like healthcare, just like being able to be fed, make sure that you have housing, right? Shelter, food, medical care is the basics. And beyond that, then, that's up to each individual, but, or that's where I think that like competitive market can come into play. But I think the basics should be covered.
A minimum set. And then do you believe that most people would want the minimum and that's how they would exist? Or do you think most people would actually take that as say, it's great to have the space. Now I can confidently try for more knowing that I won't starve?
I think that is human nature that we always want more, right? Like once you have, you kind of take for granted what you have and then you want more. So I'm sure that will happen or would happen. But I do think that like at least at the bare minimum, even if you do get to that space where you want more, I mean, it happens in England, right? Like you have national health insurance and then people can get private health care as well to get that access. But at least you know that you're going to get, if you're going to the hospital, you're not going to end up in $250,000, $1 million worth of debt, right? Like for basic things, you're not scared to call the ambulance. You're not scared to go to the hospital because you're dying. And that is, to me, so like devastatingly sad. I also think it's long-term care, right? It's being preventative, and that's the benefits of many of these like national healthcare systems or just like socialism in general is like to cut down on costs. You're preventative before the things happen, and so you're making sure that you have housing for folks so that you're not having like homeless camps, it's very costly. Like whether you like it or not, like it costs local government, states a lot of money, the federal government, right? And so how can we be preventative in all of these spaces to save us money? I think we become a more efficient, just like collective by putting those things in place. Plus, obviously, other countries are doing fairly well in that way. Like
you stole my question. You stole my question. So
they're all the happiest people on earth. So like, come on.
And they're technically per capita not as wealthy, except for the exception of Norway. I think the United States has a higher per capita than all of the other countries that are comparable. So even on a per person basis, right, these poorer countries are able to offer themselves healthcare and a basic set of living. And
they get to pick like blueberries in the summer, right? Like, right. That just sounds like idealistic and amazing.
Maybe that's the point of touching the stove again, is that each time Americans have touched the stove or enough to really, really burn themselves, the progress seems to leapfrog. So I guess it would be a matter of, it's unfortunate, but if this is what's going to happen, then how do we get it all the way there, right? Like, how do we not go back to just, I understand the people who wanted actual change and didn't see another party giving change, and at least what Trump was offering, all lies. I mean, he's doing what he's saying. First of all, he's doing everything he said.
Yep.
The benefits of what he said don't exist. That was all lies, and it continues to be lies. So he's doing exactly what he said. And anyone who pretends otherwise or is shocked, you've not listened to the man his whole life. So he's doing exactly what he says. But the benefits aren't there to actually for his benefit and none of the rest of us. So we're all getting burned I understand, because I myself wasn't happy with how things were on, January 20th, 2025. I'd still prefer to go back to the right now. But since we can't, right? How do we get to that after, where as Americans we take the people who got burned and help them get to where this point is of, like you said, there's a basic, everybody includes you. Like how can we help do that?
I think by having conversations like this, to be honest, like knowledge is power, and you don't know what you don't know. And so by sharing, and again, like people have their own experiences, they have their own ways of thinking about things. And so oftentimes you can, like, how many times have you had conversations and you're like trying to, a friend of mine was like reading or had listened to a podcast, and she was like, wow, like I just realized that data doesn't change people's minds. And I'm like, yeah, it doesn't, because like how many times have you had conversations where you're sharing like hard data? As much as people say that like they want data, it doesn't matter. And same with like myself, right? Like people could present me all sorts of data and I'm like, well, I don't know if that data is true. And like, especially nowadays, it's so hard because things are so blurred. You don't know what is truthful or what is not. Like to your point of Trump, right? Like he's doing exactly what he's saying. The benefits aren't what he's saying they're going to be, but how, as like an individual, if you're trusting words and you're trusting this person in charge, and part of what he's saying is true, but the other part isn't true. Like, how do you differentiate what is going to be true and what is not true? Like, that's just a hard space to operate in, I think, for all of us. And so, like, what are those skill sets that we need to equip people with to be able to navigate this world that is murky and gray? And I think a lot of it does align to like your own value system and like trusting your own like gut, like really getting to that spiritual, like who is your authentic higher self and what feels right to you, whether what your programming says or not. Having that be like your internal guide. And then also like having conversations, like getting different perspectives, learning, not in a way that you're feeling judged or questioned. And this is where, you know, I'm pressuring myself or like like really challenging myself to get into that space, because I just know for behavior change, like feeling judged is no way to get anybody to change like your opinion. You need to feel at least like that somebody is listening and there is like a sense of openness to be able to have that conversation. And I think right now it's so hard because the two sides are such at polar opposites that to even have that space for conversation is really hard. And so those who are manipulating and like being able to control the narrative are swooping in there. And so again, being able to have that like internal guidance, the communities that you know have your back, that you really can trust to protect you. And then to be able to analytically think yourself, like question and like come up with your own core sense of beliefs, like not what, like if it's what you grew up with, and like great if you question those, right? Like I always say, like, if you believe in a religion, more power to you. I'm happy for people who believe in whatever they believe if they've questioned what they believed and they came back to the same conclusion. Awesome. Because you can stand and you can like defend your belief systems. It's where you've never questioned it or never like thought about why and like said, do I still align with this? Like we evolve and grow as people throughout our lives. And like what you believe maybe 5 years ago may change in another 5 years, right? But it's important to question and to like have a different worldview, whether that's a person across the street or like somewhere across the world. It doesn't matter where you're getting it, as long as it's a different perspective. So I think that's important. And it's hard when you're kind of sitting in your own bubbles, which I think we're becoming more there.
To your
right?
point earlier, right? It's like I'm in a bubble where your vote tells me that you don't see someone else as a full human being. And at that point, there's a break.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
since we're not aligned at what I think is the most fundamental aspect of humanity, and you're showing no willingness to change that, at what point is like, okay, well, again, you can believe whatever you want. I'm not here to tell you you can't believe. I'm not going to force any beliefs, right? But I can see that your beliefs are harming you, or harming me, or harming everyone else around you, even if you can't. But I can't tell you to change. I can't force you to change. Although, ironically, you want to tell me how to live.
It's frustrating.
It does. It is.
Like, it really is. It's not been, even just like since Trump came in, it's been since the 80s. Like, all of this has been put in place in the US since Reagan times. And so, like, it's just being amplified. We're going to have to unlearn those behaviors.
A great transition, because it was in the 80s where all of a sudden we heard vice was virtue. Greed is good. Lorine, do you believe greed is good?
No. I think greed is survival in many ways, but I think that probably is like the crux of a lot of the issue, right? Is then you're not content or satisfied with enough.
Do we celebrate joy and fulfillment in this country? Is it anything in our zeitgeist?
I don't think we do nearly as much as we should. It's all about money, How do you make money? I think that's our joy, or we equate joy and happiness to.
Did we at one point, or do we think that, to what you were asking?
I think we did.
In our lifetime, and we lived through it with, and we're the ones who've lived through this transition?
Well, I was born in the early 80s, so I think that was probably the last time that, I would say that my childhood was fairly, like, there was a lot of elements of just like community and joy. But you also remember childhood differently. But I do think probably like the early 80s was maybe around 80s was the last time that we collectively experienced that.
It was actually really weird saying out loud when we were taught that vice is virtue, in that greed is good. Do you think the billionaires and centimillionaires earn all of their wealth? I don't think you can stop people from being greedy, as you said, right? It's part of humanity. So can we just tax that greed?
Yes. And, that's the thing. Most people wouldn't feel that. And if I was to make $1 billion, the thing is, I would be happy to tax it, right? Like, this is what I don't understand. Like, right now, all these billionaires are building these, like, what are they going to the Mars and all these, like, come on, there's people who are dying and starving, and that's how we're using the money and like the wealth on this earth. It just, there's such a big disconnect from the realities that exist that, yeah, I have a hard time.
And no one's saying you can't keep getting more, but you can't hoard it. What you have, it's just, yeah.
Or if you're spending on like just frivolous, like back in the day, if you had money, you built libraries, you gave it back into your community. It wasn't, again, just for your own personal gain. And I feel like right now it's, what can I do? I'm bored, so I'm going to go just throw more money at this like hobby instead of like bettering the world around you.
But it'll be via taxing that excessive wealth.
At this point, yeah.
That will again, that other countries do. We're not talking in a vacuum. And it's not like it's not like the average person's paying 60 or 70% of their wealth. They're paying 8 or 9% more than we do to have all of these things that actually make them wealthier and healthier, safer and secure. But they're not afraid to tax their own billionaires and centimillionaires and corporations.
Well, and honestly, at this point, when people are saying like, oh, other countries tax so much more, no, they don't. Because in America, we're taxed at like, say just the federal government, if your state doesn't tax you, 22%, but then you're paying health care, like health benefits, right? Even when I was like in a job, I would pay my premium for health care. More and more, that healthcare doesn't even cost the basic like copays. Your copays are ridiculous, and then you're like paying on top of that. So like the amount of money that you're spending on these services that in other countries you don't have to spend that money on, is you're really being like taxed at 50%. You just don't realize it because it's not in a label of a tax, but the money that's going towards those goods and services for your healthcare, your education, all the basic things is double what a socialist country is paying. It's just not communicated that way.
That sounds highly inefficient. We should go for more efficient.
It's so inefficient. Where's DOGE?
We should copy Japan and Germany and do the Bismarck model and not do Medicare for all. It's, of course, the cheaper version in the long run. But again, Germany covers, to what you said earlier, long-term care, mental health care, your regular medical care, and your prescriptions, all with a small copay, and you pay through your taxes. And there's a private version for the wealthy, and they cover 85 million Germans have the best health care in the world, and it costs 1/3 less than what we pay, public and private, right? When you add it all up, it costs 1/3 less in total. I think we can give that to ourselves.
I think we can. And then, you know what? You'd have money to travel. You'd have money to do all these other things that you want in life that you're saying is like too expensive.
Then why is it that Democrats don't say, again, there's a monetary benefit to Medicare? Like Medicare for all makes you healthier and wealthier. What do you think stops that messaging even?
You know, and I hate even saying this. I hate that I've gotten here, but over the last few years, I kind of have. I think they're part of the oligarchs, right? Like, I think there's money and greed that is part of that system too. It's not like it's two sides of the same coin at this point in time. They're both corrupt and don't want to be honest and realistic with it because it's not going to keep them in their positions of power. And, you know, that's coming from a very moderate Democrat in the past. Like, I have been, like, as I'm just, like, watching actions, right? Forget words, but, like, the actions. There's so many things that leading up to this past election, it's like, why are you just making it so much more complicated? What were the Democrats doing for the last 4 years? They knew that they had 4 years. Where was like the ground coverage to start communicating this out? Again, knowledge is power. Like, why weren't we empowering people to be able to make those decisions? 2 weeks before doing the get out the vote is the most idiotic way of running a campaign that I have ever heard. And I know that it's like the traditional way of doing it and it had worked in the past, but like, we are in a new space. You need new tactics. You need new ways of like operating. And we just haven't evolved. And I just think that it's because they don't want to at this point in time. I have nothing else to say than they don't want to.
And if they don't want to, and I agree with your critique, if they don't want to, then what is next? Or have you thought of that?
Everybody out. Like, I think turn out. Like, you need to vote everybody out, and we need people who are like words and actions are aligned. If your words and your actions are not aligned, hold you accountable.
A post-part, like break up the two-party power duopoly. Independent Americans, right?
Yeah. Like, I think we need a complete reform of our political system. Your vote should also count, right? Like, one vote per, like, get rid of the electoral college, or at least have ranked choice voting. Like, there's other ways of being able to like represent your own vote, to not feel like if you're in California and know that it's going to go blue and not feel like your vote is actually counting, right? Or in Alabama and not feel like your vote is counting. Like, that's frustrating. And that's not motivating to actually go out and like participate in the one way that you can.
This one race at the top, which in many ways is the most powerful position, but is the one that least affects your daily life, is the one that, because of this electoral college, it acts as, like, to your point, a vote suppressor in all of the other races, still the other two national, right? Your House and your Senate, but most importantly, it's suppressing the vote at your local. And that's really why, to your point, you're getting rid of the electoral college for a couple reasons. One, it is the progression of, since the Constitution was written, and it was just, a few white men with property, to even just electing the House of Representatives to all men. And then, because we did it before women, then the direct election of senators, then we could vote, right? Adding the direct election of the president is actually the finishing point of that long line of progressivism change. But to your other point, it's because it will actually, in theory, you get to that one vote, one person, or one person, one vote. And now it means something everywhere. And hopefully that's one of the things I agree that would trigger people to come out and participate more.
And probably get a bit more informed, right? Like, it's like, oh, then it becomes a powerful vote. Whereas now it's kind of hard to feel like it's actually affecting much change.
I wonder if the next, we had voting rights before as the ultimate grassroots call. I wonder if that becomes actually it again, voting rights too, but this time we mean it.
Yeah, I actually think that probably would be pretty impactful and powerful. I'd be on board. And I got a lot of free time.
Lorine, I get to ask you the last 3 questions that make this podcast oh so famous. And I start out in the big, we'll shrink it down in our scope. Lorine, if you could give Americans anything in, culturally, politically, money, in their hearts, in their minds, what is that one thing that you would give all of America?
Contentment, just a sense of contentment. Not wanting more, just feeling happy and content.
If you could give one thing to the people of Germantown, and kind of diving back in and seeing it for, I guess, a week or so, like what would you give the people of Germantown?
I would say Germantown plus probably a lot of like the coastal cities I think there is a need to go outside your own bubble. I'm guilty of it in the big cities that I live in on both sides. It's very hard to operate without having seen just like other ways of life. So yeah, I think all of America I would give just like some sort of like exchange to what's that one show that was on in like the 90s or 2000s where like people from like the cities would go to middle America and it was like wife swap or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea, actually. And I proposed we take high school kids and instead of doing foreign trips, you just cross state lines, or you have to go if you live in a small city, you have to go to a big city and vice versa. And you do that
such a big difference.
As a freshman or a sophomore, you do your inter-American visit.
Highly support that.
Lorine, if there's one thing you could give yourself today, emotionally, spiritually, in your heart, your mind, anything, what would it be that you would give yourself?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think just being in the present moment, like being very present and just like appreciating that I have this beautiful day, that I've really enjoyed this conversation, finding just like little glimmers of joy each day.
Amazing, Lorine. Thank you so much for joining the podcast. I had a great time. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it.
Lorine hopes that with a little work, each of us can find our own contentment. I believe her advice is sound. There is no time like the present to learn to live in the present. I'm grateful for Lorine sharing the morals, ethics, religious beliefs, or lack of, and views on humanity that informs her approach to culture, politics, and government. I am excited to always be bringing you more of this content. Please consider supporting this work and becoming a paying member at $8 per month by visiting weunitewewin.com. Come back for the next episode to find out our next stop in user-generated America. No fear, only love.